Hi, I'm Ignatius. I'm the editor-in-chief of Harvard Business Review, and it's been incredible working with the school on this remarkable project. I really urge all of you to pick up, if you haven't been given it already, the March issue of Harvard Business Review, which contains papers from everyone who's up here and many more that really get at this very essential question that we're talking about today, how to keep the U.S. competitive. So Nithin and Mike and Jan have sort of teed everything up, so we're just going to dive right into the discussion. So Willie, I'm going to start with you, and with the million-dollar question about manufacturing. Because I think when people think about U.S. competitiveness, a lot of people think, well, you know, we don't manufacture anymore. So the question is, do we need to make things in the U.S. to be competitive? And if so, how do we create manufacturing jobs that really can improve living standards and wages?
Well, Adi, I think there are two questions inside there. The work that we have done has really focused on the importance of maintaining manufacturing capability to being able to innovate down the road, right? Especially to the extent that some of the manufacturing processes are less mature and benefit by close interaction with R&D. That's very important. Your second question, though, about job creation is a little bit different because manufacturing jobs are only 10% of our economy right now. So if we want to see dramatic improvements in job creation, it's going to be hard to move the needle. But our concern is for the long term about the ability to maintain innovative capacity. And that over the long term is crucial for job creation.
Let me follow up, because President Obama, some of the Republican candidates are talking a lot about offering incentives, tax incentives, and other that would favor manufacturing. Does that make any sense?
Well, I think incentives, to the extent that they favor building basic R&D capabilities, I'm not in favor of picking winners in particular industries because history has shown that we're not very good at that, right? I think what we as a country need to do is make some of the long-term investments that will foster that innovative capability, and those tend to be around basic R&D.
Okay, great. We'll come back to some of that. Next, over to me here. Now, despite the financial meltdown in 2008, the survey of HBS alumni identified U.S. capital markets as an area of competitive strength. Yet in your article, you warn about what you call the financial incentive bubble. So please describe what exactly is FIB and how does it undermine competitiveness?
So when I began thinking about competitiveness, I thought about worker productivity. And worker productivity hinges on the allocation of financial capital, real capital, and human capital. That's talent. So workers are going to be productive when that capital allocation happens well. And so what I wanted to try to understand is, how is that process working? And what has struck me is that the managers and investors, the two sides of the capital markets that are allocating those capital, face dramatically different incentives than they faced 30 years ago. And the question is, why has that changed and what are the consequences of that? So what has changed? The first thing that's changed is, by and large, we trust financial markets to tell us when managers and investment managers are doing well. And we trust them to do that at very high frequencies or over very short horizons. So that's a way of saying managers now, most of their compensation comes from equity-linked compensation. And the transformation of the investment management world has been really something that I don't think people fully understand, although I think this room does. The rise of alternative assets and the idea that we will measure you based on, you take my $100, you make it into 120, and you get some piece of that. So that is the financial incentive, what I call the financial incentive bubble. The reason I call it a bubble is because I think it's unsustainable. And I think the reason it's unsustainable is because we are trying to do something with financial markets that they're ill-suited to do, which is evaluate people at very short horizons. The consequences of that are, I think, quite grave. So they go to two sides. So on the managerial side, these payoff structures, these very asymmetric payoff structures, have led to risk-taking and led to repeated notions of crises. On the investment management side, it's quite similar, which is we actually face even more asymmetric payoffs, and the appetite for risk only increases. So imagine if you are a CEO or a young investment manager, the payoff structures you face induce you to take a great deal of risk. And that's the externalities that we've been suffering with. In the paper, I trace through the links to the financial crisis and how the rise of the alternative asset industry transformed Wall Street into much more of a risk-taking appetite. So that would be one piece of the story. And then, of course, the second piece is not only is there this increased appetite for risk, but what's also of concern is that the rise of the alternative asset industry is something that our pension funds have fed increasingly over time. And that search for alpha has proven to largely been illusory. And so that is a further complication here, which is we have a set of incentive structures and a rise of industries that are A, giving rise to risk-taking in ways they shouldn't, and B, promising alpha in a way that doesn't actually get delivered. The link to competitiveness is these folks are the marginal players in markets for equities, for corporate bonds, for corporate loans, for the market for corporate control. So the way they think about their world matters enormously for the way capital gets allocated. And of course, human capital is getting allocated because of these very asymmetric risk payoffs. So my concern is, without solving that underlying problem, without getting two sides of the capital markets to have the right kinds of horizons, it's going to be very tough to solve the problems we have.
Okay, but let me follow up. So let's assume that that description is absolutely accurate. How do you burst that bubble without sending shockwaves?
So I try to go through the article of some bad ideas. So I don't think changing the tax system to address that is a good idea. I spent a fair amount of my time thinking about tax policy, and we have bigger problems and bigger fish to fry than trying to do that. So I think what's much more useful is to try to awaken the monitors, who are really the pension funds and the endowments who have completely outsourced their jobs to evaluate and compensate people. And that simple, naive intuition that, well, we can just rely on financial markets to do it is wrong. So I think the first piece is getting the pension funds and endowments to wake up to their responsibilities so they stop outsourcing their central function. The second is to restore judgment into the process of evaluating managers. And then the third is a reevaluation of the nature of the alternative asset industry to make sure that it is one which is actually providing the alternative that they promise to and are delivering on the alpha that they promise to. So there are a set of recommendations that are associated with that as well.
Yeah, okay. Bill, I want to get you in the conversation. So one aspect that we pat ourselves on the back about America's position in the world is our entrepreneurial talent. Your research suggests that our entrepreneurial engine is showing signs of weakness. So first, can you talk about what's holding it back?
Well, it's almost the mirror image of what Mihir talked about, because in one system we seem to have had an excess of risk-seeking behavior, and that was behavior not necessarily balanced by reward. And in the entrepreneurship area, we have the world's best system for having smart people and capital pursue opportunities, a critical element of which is the ability to fail. So nowhere else in the world can you start a business, fail, and be considered experienced rather than a social outcast. So that turns out to be just structurally critical, because even if you look at the best venture capitalists in the world, 60% of the companies in their portfolio fail. And the only way you find a Google, the only way you find Intel, the only way you find Facebook is to launch a lot of opportunities and then hope that people succeed at the end. So that system is at risk today, in part because we are building into the government, maybe even building into the national psyche, risk aversion. We're trying to protect people from loss. And when you think about that, that's almost the opposite of what we need. We need entrepreneurs to be out there finding solutions to the world's problems. We need people to take on even riskier projects. So a good example of that is there's a company called TerraPower. I don't own any stock in TerraPower. We're required now to say that. But TerraPower, what is TerraPower? TerraPower is an effort by Nathan Myhrvold, the former Chief Technology Officer of Microsoft, to create a new kind of nuclear reactor. And the reactor has the characteristic that it takes as its fuel spent fuel rods, which are a problem, and it uses 97% of the energy in those fuel rods, which is good, and can produce clean, reliable, domestically produced, sustainable for 100 years supply of electricity to the world. And that's exactly the kind of project we want. Now, by the way, that's got to be, who's going to start a nuclear? You've got to be kidding. So when they raised capital, who did they raise it from? They raised it from Bill Gates, because Bill said, if that works, that has a greater impact on world health, on the population, on global prosperity than any other project I could imagine, because if China continues to build a coal-fired plant every week, God help us all. So it's exactly the kind of project we want. It's exactly what's at risk when people get regulatory cramps and try to protect people from ever losing money. And it's my hope that the entrepreneurs will continue to do the great work that has made the country great.
But talk about that a little more. I mean, if you're not Bill Gates, and I can't see with the lights if he's here or not, but you know, how do entrepreneurs get the U.S., you know, people in this audience, what can they do to get the U.S. into a more competitive space?
So I never worry about entrepreneurs. I worry about impediments to entrepreneurship. So for example, if you make the capital markets so costly to access, so companies can't go public. We have Sarbanes-Oxley. I have the strongly held view that Sarbanes-Oxley did nothing to protect us from the financial crisis. It allowed us to count the chairs on the deck of the Titanic, not to stop the Titanic from going down. But it has an unintended consequence, which is it doesn't improve real performance of companies, but it does make it more costly to go public or to be on a path to go public. And as a result, we've seen a complete dissolution of the market for going public until companies get to the point like Facebook that they have a $100 billion market cap. So I think systems are always at risk. They're fragile. You have to pay attention to what happens at the end when people are harvesting. You have to pay attention to their ability to fail. And you have to pay attention to the existence of opportunity and the perception of opportunity. And our system works incredibly well now, and we see it at HBS, of really smart people going after opportunity with a vengeance. Entrepreneurship is so rampant at Harvard Business School, we're trying to create a venture capital-free zone in the parking lot.
Okay, let me go on to Elizabeth now. Now, in your paper, you suggest America has fantastic strengths that are wasted because the links aren't being made, that there are 3 million jobs unfilled because of a lack of skills, because universities aren't talking to businesses and other links aren't being made. So talk a little bit about, you know, how collaboration might be a solution here.
So I want to get the advanced manufacturing back, get entrepreneurship, and make sure that we can do it whether or not we fix the financial system, because the issue in part is connection. So we have lots of entrepreneurs, and I don't want to leave it to stealth all-nighters in their Harvard dorm rooms for Bill Gates to start Microsoft or Mark Zuckerberg to start Facebook. We have to be much more explicit, and we have to make a lot of connections of 4 kinds. One is between ideas and enterprises, whether they're big or small. So we need a lot more collaboration to build industries of the future among companies. I'll start with big, and then I want to get to entrepreneurship. And there are so many examples right around us here. I mean, in Albany now, the university, State University of New York at Albany, is a center of excellence in nanoscale engineering, and it has attracted a consortium of companies, IBM, Intel, Global Foundries, to invest in that area, bring jobs, connect with not only the science, but connect with potential entrepreneurs who might start companies based on this science. We need that integrated, focused effort. We need companies opening up their platforms collaboratively to other companies to build industries of the future. I mean, Verizon, I love the Waltham Innovation Center in Massachusetts, where Verizon has invited in companies like Cisco and Siemens to do whatever they want to do as a project that will build the 4G LTE applications. So Verizon has the network, companies start things, and Verizon has also invested in startups, including a robotics company and a connected home company, 7 people, 8 people, against giant companies, but it's creating industries of the future through collaboration. The second thing we need to do more collaboratively is connect small to large. I mean, if small companies, especially startups, which were responsible for the lion's share of new jobs in America, but have slipped, if they're cut out of the global supply chains because big companies find it much more efficient, it's not only whether they look overseas, it's that they find it more efficient to consolidate their supply chain and make purchases from fewer companies, that cuts out small business. And it was hard to get data, but a high proportion of all small companies actually sell to other businesses. They need larger companies. So if we can connect big to small, have big companies build the capabilities of suppliers. I'm not saying they should buy American. I think patriotic appeals don't really work. But if they build the capabilities of local suppliers and make it easy for them to get access, and we'll hear in the next panel about something very creative that IBM is doing to make it possible for small companies to get access to the purchasing power of big companies, that also starts building what I call a rich ecosystem to build prosperity. The third thing, you mentioned the skills thing, 3 million unfilled jobs, largely because of an absence of what we call middle skills. We need the advanced skills too, and Harvard will always be in business, but we need those skills as manufacturing technicians, software engineers, etc. And right now, we don't have it. We have, in the US, there are 850 occupations that could certify apprentices, and for the most part, only a handful in construction actually use apprentices that learn how to do something useful. Maybe they'll go to college or graduate school later. And we have a community college system that is inadequate all over the country, although it's somewhat better here, but in Chicago, abysmal, and unconnected to the needs of these employers that actually have jobs. And imagine if we also connected that to the public schools, to kids. We have 1 million high school dropouts in America. That's a huge waste of talent. So there's another great innovation that on the next panel, a 6-year high school where kids enter college in 9th grade connected to a partnership with a community college and a potential employer, I won't say who it is, and they not only learn skills and could, if they want to, go on to higher education, but they help fill that skills gap. The whole ecosystem is enriched. And the last part is the collaboration among leaders across sectors in every region. The U.S. is the world's largest common market of independent economic regions. We do a lot of things in the U.S. at the regional level. The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Those are important units. And in those units, when leaders get together, find a coherent plan, it's amazing how you can get beyond partisan divides and ideology. I'm incredibly impressed that in Miami-Dade County, the voters a few years ago, in an anti-tax, very conservative state, the voters in that climate voted overwhelmingly, 87% in favor of raising taxes to pay for children's services. It's unbelievable. But it was because business leaders locally could build coalitions across the sectors, public, private, government, with nonprofits, with civic advocates, with businesses to say, this is important for our region. That's the ecosystem in which we do business, and we need to make sure that we nurture all of our talent, that we create new businesses, that we collaborate to build industries of the future.
Okay, all right, great. I'm going to open this up a little bit more now, and actually I want to ask Bill a question that I assume a lot of people are thinking about, definitely a lot of our readers have wondered about, which is, you know, is it parochial to be looking at U.S. competitiveness? I mean, I think a lot of ostensibly U.S. companies view themselves as global companies. They're concerned about competitiveness. They may not be as concerned as we all are right now about U.S. competitiveness. So can you help me out here?
Well, I think there's a useful distinction between what the leader of a global enterprise has to think about and what we as citizens have to think about. And if we don't get investments in the commons here, just as if we didn't get investments in the commons in Indonesia or in Russia or China, then those countries will suffer, and ultimately the entire world will suffer. So I think what we have is a race in which competitiveness is at the forefront of how people think about what they have to do in their country, and the race to be globally competitive raises all nations. So I think in the US it's particularly important, partly because we're 40% of the global economy, but also because we have historically provided a set of other services that are valued and that we need to be able to afford to provide. But in general, it's an issue for every single citizen and every single business leader, no matter where they are throughout the world.
And by the way, if anyone else wants to jump in, raise your hand. We'll make this a little more open now. Next question, Elizabeth, let me come back to you. The focus of a lot of what everyone's talking about today is kind of doing an end run around Washington, that we can't wait for Washington to get its act together. But more than one author in this issue has suggested that that's not good enough, that it's up to business and society to make it clear to politicians in Washington and elsewhere that inaction on really critical issues like this is no longer acceptable. So I guess my question is, how can that message be conveyed effectively?
It can be, well, first of all, it's a very important message because aside from the system itself, which Mihir was talking about and others talking about, needing to be fixed nationally, we need the investment because without federal investment in things that touch on R&D, even aggregating all the investments that Intel and IBM and Samsung might be doing around semiconductors and nanotechnology wouldn't be enough. So we need it. How do we get it? I think we don't get it by each sector or each industry going one by one to lobby for its interests. I think we get it when we've built the kind of collaboration regionally that makes a strong coalition that can press on the representatives, whoever's running for office in that region, and see that their own voters care about these things. But it's not going to happen if we continue to do things in silos.
Mihir, let me ask you a question I have. Who's doing better than the U.S.? I mean, we're talking about the hit we're taking to our competitiveness. We ran a column in this issue by a prominent Chinese economist, Xu Xiaonian, who said, man, you guys have it, we don't. That China's advantages are running out and that the U.S. rewards innovation, it's driven by market forces and not by central planning, it protects IP, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, isn't the U.S. still the model for a competitive economy? Is it possible we're overreacting here?
Well, so I think, I think it's worthwhile to think about that. And the first piece of that is to say that certainly we are better than a lot of places in the world. And I think we've all been to those places and we understand the reason for that. But that doesn't mean we should be complacent in any meaningful sense of the word. So I think what Mike and Jan have highlighted is we really are all invested in making sure median wages and the productivity of American workers rises. We are all deeply invested in that idea. And we have much to be proud of. Our universities figure largely as Mike and Jan's research suggested, but there are some significant problems. So one common notion here was politics and policy. And there are things there that we are really strangling, I think, corporations. And my own research and my own interests are along the lines of tax reform and corporate tax reform. There are big things we can do there that would unleash a remarkable set of strengths that are nascent in many ways and that we have enormously to be proud of. It's just that these last 2 decades have been tough, and if they continue to be tough, then people start to question the entire enterprise. And when people question the entire enterprise, things get complicated.
So I remember when the Japanese were coming, and in fact when they bought Rockefeller Center, I mean that was like awful. They were going to take over. They were going to do everything that we didn't do and do it better. And we learned from that. We were uncompetitive at that time, and we learned how to make investments and to improve our institutions. And I think we can do it again. I think we have the strength. I think we might borrow a little bit here and there. I think we might borrow from Germany their concern with R&D investments and with apprenticeships and other kinds of building of middle skills. But we're enormously strong as long as we don't lose the entrepreneurial engine. We continue to invest in universities, absolutely critical. But we have to take action. It won't happen automatically. It requires investment. And then our natural ability to do things region by region, our decentralized nature, states as laboratories of democracy, laboratories of innovation, but we have to be creative, and we have to innovate now, not just in products within companies or services, we have to innovate institutionally. It's why I'm excited about things like, could we have 6-year high schools, grade 14, enter college at grade 9. That's an institutional innovation. So let's turn our creativity to taking our strengths and making them better for the next decade.
Mike.
Yeah, Adi, I think I would agree with everything that's been said. You know, the metaphor that came to life for me as we were doing this work was, we have these amazing strengths in America, and you know, that Chinese economist kind of said it well. But what we've done is we've piled on those strengths. And we've just been allowing just the cost of doing business to rise and rise and rise and rise because of tax complexity, because of a legal system that, you know, just heaps extra cost on American-based companies, on a regulatory process that, you know, is not producing better outcomes than we see in places like Europe, but it's just hugely inefficient and expensive and litigious and confrontational. And so I think what we've been unable to do in America lately is kind of pragmatically start to deal with these costs. And of course, I didn't even mention healthcare, which is one of the biggest ones of all. We haven't been able to deal with these costs. So what we've done is we've neutralized our enormous country here with our enormous strength. And I think one of the things we have to do is where business can play a role, business has to get directly involved in things like skills where we can actually change the world. But in terms of public policy, we do need government to help with some of these costs of doing business that we've just allowed to rise for no good reason.
Let me follow up with you for a sec. So when Roosevelt was talking about the Japanese bogeyman, I mean that was a period of relative decline in the U.S. economy. You know, now the standard fear, I suppose, is that China is going to eat our lunch. You know, I mean, there's got to be on many people's minds. What if, you know, can't we just wait for the next bubble to lift the economy and get us out of our problems, and we won't even be having symposiums like this anymore?
No, Adi, you editors are controversial seekers.
I'm throwing you a softball.
Yeah. Okay. Well, no. I think that. I think we're pretty much at our limits, you know, in terms of the bubble. I mean, what was the cost of that bubble? You know, we had enormous debt was piled up. We've got a federal budget on track for disaster. I mean, catastrophe. You know, we've got a level of inequality which is making it harder and harder and harder and harder for government officials to be doing things that favor business. And so we're kind of, I don't think there's room for many more bubbles. I think we have to start kind of dealing with some of these underlying fundamentals. Yes, we did have a steep recession. Yes, there was a consumption bubble. Yes, you know, all those things do tend to work themselves out. But if you don't have skills, if you have high cost of doing business, if you kind of laden a wonderful, you know, kind of entrepreneurial economy with all this sand in the gears, then ultimately no bubble is going to solve that problem.
Yeah. Jen, I want to ask you a question. So you and Mike wrote a piece about outsourcing and offshoring, and really made the statement that a lot of the decisions that companies are making, that they're not ultimately rational. And you know, I was at the symposium at Harvard Business School where you presented some of those ideas, and I saw some people respond as if you were insulting, that, you know, we're not simply looking at labor costs, we're looking at a whole lot of stuff. But I want to ask you specifically about some of the feedback that you've gotten to that assertion, and whether it changed at all your thinking about the research on outsourcing.
I mean, our assertion is not that business leaders have failed to make simple calculations that are just wildly off the map. We've got two elements of the argument. One is that there really are problems with the U.S. business environment that justify going elsewhere. And in fact, in many senses, for the health of the U.S. economy, we want firms that are based here to explore the entire world, right? The second part of the argument, though, is that there are things that are very difficult for any management team, no matter how sophisticated, to fully understand, particularly in an environment which is changing, making large-scale decisions of a type that they've not made repeatedly, right, to go overseas. And there are particularly 2 points where where there is potential for learning, a natural potential for learning. The first is the cost of operating at a distance, right? There are enormous numbers of hidden costs that are indirect and often arise much later than one expects. So the first time one goes abroad, it's easy to see the wage benefits, right? It's hard to understand how you might have to add on extra supervisory labor. You may have to add on other direct labor. You may have extra costs of shipping. The other part of that is these things change over time. It becomes more expensive. Wages in China rise dramatically. The second thing that's very difficult to anticipate when you first go abroad is the benefits you may have from being rooted at home, right? That you've had enormous access to public goods in the U.S., which business itself helped to create. And you don't recognize the role you had in that. You assume you'll take the U.S. for granted, right? So I think it's almost like you've gone abroad on vacation and you've noticed all these great other places to go to. And it's wonderful. And then you come back home and you kind of say, this place is kind of run down. And then the question is, what do you do next? Do you invest to fix up the home? Or do you take longer vacations?
Willie, let me come back to you for a sec. R&D. For a lot of industries, it's moved out of the U.S., often following initial movements of relatively unsophisticated manufacturing. How concerning should that be in the context of all these questions as R&D is moving farther and farther away? What's the cost then to U.S. industry, and can it conceivably come back?
I think one of the reasons R&D has moved overseas is because people see the benefit of it being close to manufacturing. And as a lot of that manufacturing initially has chased labor arbitrage, it makes sense from a business standpoint to move it close as well. I think the other thing that we have to look at is the cost of doing R&D offshore oftentimes is considerably less. If you look at the cost of engineers in China or India, it's a ratio of 4 or a ratio of 5 higher in the United States. Okay, so all of those things I think factor in. But the U.S. still has strengths which really go back to a lot of the investments in public goods that the government has made over the last century. If you look at the historical basis of this, going back towards, the strengths the U.S. have are really in institutional foundations like the education system, a strong property rights regime, okay, and extensive investments, especially post-World War II, in basic science. All right, and this is where we still lead the world. All those public goods, as Mike Porter mentioned earlier, really fed the commons. And this is still where we are strong. But we should not overlook the fact that starting post-World War II, other countries realized the importance of investments in those public goods. Countries like Singapore, like Japan, like Taiwan, Korea, and now China have recognized the importance of building those capabilities. So they're not going to let us go and take that area uncontested.
One great tragedy in the U.S., and it's reflective of the inability of our political system to make common sense or progress, is around immigration. So we are all immigrants. We have now made it harder for people to come to the U.S. We've made it harder for them to go across borders. We've attracted the best and the brightest to our university systems, to our postdoc programs and the like, and we have turned into a system that strongly encourages them to pursue opportunity in their home country. And we see it at Harvard and the labs, and we see it at Harvard Business School and what our students are doing. And so I think the simplest imaginable policy that would have the greatest impact on entrepreneurship and the quality of human capital in the U.S. is staple a green card to every graduate degree. Period.
Yeah. And there are some places that are making attracting immigrants the center of their economic development strategy. Because people who come hungry and want to build businesses and already have proven that they're risk takers. That's very positive. And some regions of the world, of this country, I mean, surprisingly, South Carolina, a couple of times has revived manufacturing by trying to deliberately attract foreign manufacturers to come here and invest, and then offering international baccalaureate degrees in their high schools to make it attractive for them to have their families here. And now they're doing another round of this. So we want foreign investment into the United States. We want immigration. And it seems to me a little misreading of history and economic development for anybody to want to start, putting up the walls and keeping them out. And by the way, when we do that, we do another thing, because what was that issue, Jan, you said about you don't want to just go on vacation and see another place looks better? Well, actually, I do want many of our companies to go on vacation and take their small suppliers with them. That is, big company purchasers can carry a lot of small local businesses into export markets. So we have a lot of ways in which our engagement with the world is part of this U.S. competitiveness effort, and we have a stake in those other countries developing too, because that creates markets for us. So nothing about this says we either give it all away to them or we do it ourselves at our expense. I think this is about how to make sure that we continue to be a very exciting place to build businesses, to raise families with high quality of life, to educate our children, and to provide opportunity for all citizens. And for that, we do need to look at our investments and create some institutional innovations.
Sorry. May I add that, our graduate programs, especially in the science and technology and engineering, have built tremendous capacity, and now they cannot fill them with American citizens as students. So what we do is we bring people from abroad to fill those programs, and then we send them back home. If you look at some of the tremendous growth in the Chinese economy, for example, a great deal of the high-end innovation is driven by returnees.
I was just going to draw on this point, which is there's the labor issue and then there's the corporate issue, which is we are dangerously close to demonizing corporations who invest abroad. And I think that's very perilous. It's the same logic of building a wall.
Right.
And the evidence on that is fairly straightforward, which is we know that as firms grow abroad, they actually tend to grow at home. So the entire notion that people are shipping our jobs overseas is fabulously, politically attractive, but it's not consistent with the facts, and it's dangerous in that it starts to make us think that when people operate abroad, they're somehow displacing activity here. That can be true, but on average, we know that the effects are actually the opposite, which is they're complementary activities. And that's something I think is quite dangerous as well.
Okay, so we're going to go to the next round of this, and then I'm going to take questions that have already been submitted from audience people. But this is meant to be a sort of lightning round in the spirit, the old joke about the Russian economist who's asked if he had one word to describe the economy, what would it be? And he says, good. And then they said, well, if you had 2 words, what would it be? He says, not good. You get more than 2 words, but let's keep this pretty brief. And I'm going to ask everybody really to chip in, because the whole point of this is not to talk about the problems, but really to sort of identify solutions, big or small, that can give us hope and give us templates for going forward. So let's see. Bill, I'll start with you. Basically, the question I'm throwing out to everybody is to come up with the one compelling idea or model that can best make the U.S. more competitive.
First of all, when I was in high school, I learned Russian, which didn't work out so well. So for all of those who have kids learning Mandarin, just "Я говорю по-русски."
How?
You know, I think there's one problem that I would mention is that our science funding, which has been an enormous strength, if you look at the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, has been just a national treasure. And I think what you're seeing in those systems is an inevitable risk aversion, so that they're getting more conservative the harder it is to allocate the capital. So right now, for example, in the National Cancer Institutes, the success rate for a young researcher is 7%, by which I mean there's a 93% failure rate. And if you don't already know the answer to the project you submit to the NIH, you will not get funding. That is a way to do incremental innovation. That's a way to feed the status quo, and that is not the way to solve the problems that we have in the U.S. So I think we need a fundamental rethinking of how science funding takes place, and frankly, philanthropy to start to play a role to encourage the kind of innovation that we all need.
Okay. Willie, compelling idea or model that can best make the U.S. more competitive?
I think investing in public goods like doubling, for example, investment in science, technology, and engineering. We have a natural experiment of the last 20 years where investment in biotech and medicine has gone up, whereas it's been very flat in science and technology and engineering. And we see the results in terms of growth in the biotech industry in the U.S. and comparable flattening and moving offshore. Investing in those basic public goods and the government being a customer for some of those. We've seen the benefits of military and space consumption, for example, in pulling along some of those needs. History is a good guide.
Mm-hmm. Mike, you want to toss in the best example?
Well, you know, I think that the one thing that I think would have a transformational impact almost immediately is if we could actually agree on a consensus budget restructuring for America. We had Erskine Bowles join us the evening of our summit. We pulled together about 100 business and government and other leaders to come on our campus in November to talk about this issue. And you know, Erskine spoke that evening about the Bowles-Simpson proposal, and which was bipartisan, which was supported by the great majority of representatives from both parties there, which involved a menu of choices and cuts and some tax changes, of course. And I think every 99 out of the 100 people that evening, I think, were ready to vote for that. And yet we didn't get it done. We didn't get it done. And as a result, we've thrown a cloud over our entire economy. We've also literally made it impossible to make the kind of investments that Willie just talked about forever, you know, as far as we can see. So I think if we in business could actually somehow, you know, have a sort of a business consensus all across America that we're willing to do such a consensus compromise deal, I think that would be transformational.
Okay. Great. Rosabeth, you've talked about some examples, but, you know, what's the one compelling idea or model to make the U.S. more competitive?
Well, first of all, I have to vote for science, which we were hearing from several people. That's very important. We have to keep investing in the skills and the knowledge. But if I could add something that's a compelling idea, we have to get rid of a little bit of the ideology that every company stands or falls on its own, and we need more collaboration, more consortia, more ways in which there's concentrated effort building industries of the future, and in every region identifying what are the strengths and investing in getting more of that going at the same time, and I would say through incubators, accelerators, to get new businesses going, to let people try and fail. But in fact, the data show that there is a much higher success rate of startups when they have been actively incubated and they are networked with lots of other organizations. So creating those strong networks focused on some areas that build the future, letting 1,000 flowers bloom, but not all by themselves. That's what an ecosystem means. It means you enrich the soil and you increase the survival rates. And so Startup America, which Steve Case has been instrumental in, is extremely important because big companies also benefit from lots of new ideas that come from small startups. It's just that they're often connected. So I guess my big idea if it's a big idea, has to do with networks and collaborations, and the federal investments in science and the state investments, absolutely. But also, there could be a way in which federal spending is not random and haphazard, but it targets those places where there are strong coalitions because they're more likely to be successful rather than fritter away those funds that we taxpayers don't want to have frittered.
Okay, me here. How do we
that was like a big one idea, long one idea.
So I'm deeply concerned with the ultimate capital providers in the economy being asleep at the switch. So I'm deeply concerned about pension funds waking up and starting to monitor investment managers and managers. So if I was to do something radical, I would say first, they should stop playing around with assumed rates of return. They should stop pursuing alpha that doesn't show up. They should start paying their people not like civil servants, but like highly talented investment managers. They should try to disintermediate the alternative asset industry, as many Canadian pension funds have started to do. And they should start waking up and serving on boards and doing the monitoring that is their central function in an economy.
Jen?
You know, I've encountered so many great ideas through the year-long process that the school has been involved with. It's very hard to narrow it down to one. I'm also I'm tempted to move towards something around public education because I feel it's not been mentioned so far and it's so important to our society. But coming closer to what we've looked at, the one thing that I would want to see change is companies to do what actually we're seeing the most sophisticated companies already doing, and that is realizing they've moved through kind of a trajectory where they started by truly being rooted in one place in the U.S. and then exploring the world, and trying things out, moving place to place, to realizing what they really need to have is multiple homes in each of which they put down deep roots. And that's about U.S. competitiveness, but frankly, it's more broadly about business fulfilling its full potential in society.
Okay, fantastic.
I just want to say on the record that Bill Solomon studied Russian. I studied Latin. So tell me how that builds the future. So when we're thinking about education, I think that the liberal arts and arts are incredibly important and they enrich our lives. But why not make education have some practical connection to the world? And then we study as citizens all these other wonderful things, and I'll be glad to do a Latin oration later.
I just say, I think what Roosevelt has highlighted in her article about the connections of the education system to business strikes me as just a natural first step. I don't know why we would not do it as a society.
I'll point out that in other countries, I was recently in one, where the education, the universities, talk to business about the requirements of what kind of people they need. And then they ensure that they get enough people into their program to fulfill those needs. Now, this is a small country, and small countries have a unique challenge in this global environment. But I think other countries have demonstrated some good ideas that I would not be bashful about copying.
Okay, we have about 10 or 11 minutes left, and when invitations went out to alumni, we asked people to submit questions for this panel. So rather than use up time sort of passing a microphone around out there, I'm going to read some of the questions that came in, and these are real. This is from Joe the plumber. Okay, this first question is from William Rosser, who these people may be in the audience, who was an MBA in 1962. So maybe, Mike, I'll throw this your way, and anyone else can jump in as well. Here's the question. As worker productivity increases, the number of workers required to fulfill the normal demand will diminish. How do we then create well-paid jobs for such displaced workers?
Well, remember I said very briefly earlier that competitiveness is not a zero-sum game. And what I meant was that there is no fixed pool of demand in the world. And the question is, who's going to fulfill that demand and whose workers are going to get the jobs? That's not the right way to think about it. We know that there's almost unlimited needs in the world. There's almost unlimited human needs for health, for housing, for all kinds of things that we can't even imagine today. There's new products and new services that are going to be created, and those are going to expand the pool of demand in the world. And if we can't think that competitiveness is about somehow getting our bigger share of a fixed pie. Competitiveness is about making ourselves a more productive location, a more innovative location, a location in which we can do things with higher skill, and through that process, all kinds of new jobs are going to get created. And I think the problem facing the U.S. is not that we don't have great strengths, but that we haven't been upping our game. We haven't been taking the steps that were required to make ourselves more productive, while many other countries have been hell-bent on doing just that. And they've been moving at light speed to build infrastructure and improve their education and make the universities better and invest in basic science. So I think that we can't get hung up in we win and they lose, they win and we lose. We've got to get hung up on really dealing with the fundamental issue that hopefully has been emerging throughout this discussion.
Mm-hmm. Roosevelt, let me ask you this. This is from Richard Pond, who has an MBA 1991. He writes, Singapore demonstrates the potential effectiveness of a proactive government role in improving competitiveness. Given the current lack of appetite for more government in the U.S., how do we recreate or roll out successful projects such as Minnesota's Itasca project, which are employer-led, which is employer-led rather than government-led civic alliance?
I think, first of all, that's our great strength in America, that we know how to roll out employer-led and use the private sector, and the business leaders do get involved. I would say about Singapore, for which I have great admiration, I've spent a lot of time through the years on Singapore's strategic plans. It's kind of the size of Massachusetts. And I've also spent a lot of time on Massachusetts strategic plans. And it's not as though in Massachusetts we have an authoritarian government, or that you do in New York, and we can tell people what to do, or we have a government like in China where they can redevelop whole areas by just deciding to force the peasants off their land and redeveloping it. But the fact that we come together and we develop these plans regionally, and the states want to compete with each other. I mean, one of the interesting things in David Moss's paper, in the Harvard Business Review article, he talked about how in the 19th century there was stalemate in the state of New York, but then because Massachusetts had universal K-12 public education, New York State wanted it too. So I think we can at the local level, by showing excellence in these kinds of plans, get them emulated, and maybe there at some point would be a national or federal role, but it's a strength that we can do it in regions that are about the size of Singapore. And so we get our act together. Here in New York, we get our act together in California. They need their act together at the moment. And we can make amazing things happen. We don't depend only on the strong federal government.
Mm-hmm. So we accepted one anonymous question because it seemed like such a good one to throw at Bill. And that is this. Is the real problem that we need to change our culture in America, or do we just grow fat, proud, and lazy? Bill?
Look, I don't believe that we have a cultural problem unless we allow the cultural problem to really begin to evolve. And I fear what's going on now. I think this is a land of opportunity. This is a land of responsibility. The more we make it a place where we focus on how you slice a fixed pie and not how you grow the pie. Again, I think they're not unrelated, so I'm not dismissing the income inequality issue. that will be horrible. The more we begin to say it's something where we're going to take away all of the risk for a large proportion of the economy, I think that's the wrong thing to do, paradoxically. And it's not about eliminating safety nets, it's about the whole notion of risk and reward. So I think we're always at risk, and at the end of the day, I'm optimistic about people's work ethic. I'm optimistic about their willingness to fix problems. We see it when there are tornadoes. We see it in places like New York. To be in New York City is such a short time after 9/11, and to see it thrive the way it is, you cannot be pessimistic about this country.
Over to Mihir. This is a question from Wick Simmons, MBA 1966. Have the capital tax and regulatory reforms that we have imposed on corporations and financial institutions actually served to sap U.S. competitiveness?
I think this goes to Mike's earlier point about the cost of doing business, and I think there's no question that the tax system, just to take that as one piece of it, is contributing to our competitiveness problem. So specifically, just think about the corporate tax. We have the worst of all worlds. We have a high statutory rate, and we have a low average rate, which is just the worst of all worlds. And what does that give people an incentive to do? Shift profits around the world and play tax planning games. So there is a significant opportunity, I think, to change that, to bring the rate way down. And both, I think, sides of the aisle have already started to talk about that. I think the other things you could change on the corporate side, you could change the way we tax foreign income, which I think is really, really problematic for our firms as they compete around the world. And then finally, I think to fund part of that, we have to think about the fact that we now, half of all business income is untaxed because of pass-through entities. So we have to get that, and we have to understand what's going on there, and we have to think about why we have a corporate tax at 35% that's targeted only on basically public corporations. So I think there's a great deal of stuff to do there. The other broader tax issues, I think, as I said, I spent time on tax policy. I just think we're going to have a consumption tax in the next 10 years. And I think we should, and I think there are all kinds of reasons why we should, most importantly because we penalize savings today. And I think that could be an enormous piece of the puzzle. The capital piece, I think, is more complicated, which is our financial institutions, I think capitalizing them in a more significant way. It will show up in higher cost to intermediation, but I know my colleagues, Robin Greenwood and David Sharfstein, who wrote the finance piece in the issue, feel that increasing capital requirements is actually quite a good thing to do.
Willie, this is from Varun Gupta, MBA 2011. I think it's really getting at the gap between sort of theory and reality. So the question's simple, and you've dealt with it in some ways already. Can the manufacturing base lost to China and other low-cost production locations really ever come back to the U.S.?
Well, I think a lot of those pieces aren't going to come back, those that are fairly well modularized and well codified, where it's mostly about labor arbitrage. I think those pieces are not going to come back. I think another large segment that's not going to come back are those where the supply chain has been localized. I was down in Jalisco State in Mexico. We were talking to the president of Mexico actually about, they have a very competitive situation. The labor rate is almost the same. And I said, could you ever successfully export from here to China? And he said, no, it's because China has captured the electronic supply chain. Right? So I think those parts are gone. I think we in the United States have to look to the future because those are a commons effect. That was actually the thinking behind the commons and how we had let the commons erode. We have to look to those industries that are important for the future and focus on the capability building that we need in this country. That's where the growth will be. That's where a lot of innovation will continue to be. If we hold on to manufacturing in those areas, that will be job growth in the future. But a lot of those parts that are lost, it's going to be very tough to have them come back.
Mike, you've got the final question. This is from Phillips Sherman, MBA 1965. Aren't factors like very high medical costs and the world's highest defense costs relative to GDP getting in the way of U.S. competitiveness, especially as we're all defining competitiveness?
Yes.
What if you had two words?
We have allowed areas like healthcare, to take an example, to be exempt from the kind of relentless productivity improvement that by and large happens in other parts of the economy, for a whole variety of reasons. defense, is important to any economy, but it's a question of, are we getting the best results, from our defense spending? Have we got a defense system that is justifying the very, very high costs that we still bear, and then there's all the other issues of, are we taking on too much, as a country? But I think that I think Jan and I I think our whole team are fundamentally very optimistic about the potential for America. None of the stuff we're talking about today is some new intergalactic law of physics that means that America can't succeed. This is, by and large, a lot of this is just blocking and tackling. As Rosabeth said, it's collaborating. It's using common sense. But for some reason, and I think we've kind of speculated on that in various papers in the issue, for some reason, we've lost a little bit of our ability in America to kind of move ahead pragmatically on some of these things. We got confused by globalization and how this was a panacea, and that business could just do that, and that would, drive success. And I think that the moment we believe now is starting to come where I think all of us in business can now start to see that the system that we have today and the trajectory we're on are simply not acceptable. And so again, our hope, and of course more on this later, is that we in the private sector can take the lead, not wait for somebody else, but really take the lead in attacking some of these practices directly where we can, but also in having a different kind of dialogue with government at both the regional and national level to solve some of these problems.
All right, so we've come to the end of our panel. I urge you, if you're interested in these topics, to pick up the March issue of HBR. $16.95. If any alumni can't afford it, talk to me outside. We can work something out. But please join me in congratulating really a fantastic panel on the stage today.